Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Nicole from @FormerFatGirl on YouTube. We're going to be looking at Dr. Paul Saladino. Why Paulo Saladino quit carnivore and now eats 300 carbs a day, apparently.
The thing for me that I've changed my mind on since I wrote the book in 2019 was carbohydrates, and then in connecting with that, the ketosis and ketogenic diets. So when I wrote the Carnivore Code, and this is humbling, this is what we all do, is we write books and then you put your thoughts into cement, you freeze your thoughts in kryptonite, and then you change your thoughts and you think, oh, the book, it's just not a living document. But when I wrote the book, I was of the opinion that carbohydrates were not great for humans and was sort of looking at the literature differently. And over time, I learned personally in my own life, doing a carnivore diet of meat, organs, and fat and salt for a year and a half, that including carbohydrates in my diet improved my health from there. So my whole story is that I was eating kind of a paleo diet, had really bad eczema, which I'd had my whole life. Getting rid of vegetables and all plant food significantly improved the eczema, so much so that in the last 4.5, 5 years since I've been on this more specific path, I haven't had any flares of the eczema that are significant at all. That's a big deal because I had massive eczema on my elbows, my wrists, my hips, so much so that I really couldn't even wear pants easily. It would get on my shirts. I couldn't do.
What do you think so far then about this talk? So he's written a book, he said, carbs are a waste of time, don't eat plants, don't eat fruit, don't eat vegetables. Now he's kind of changed his tune a little bit. What do you think about this?
And I think this is where I've said this a couple times on my channel, defending Paul in a way, but not necessarily agreeing with the amount. I think he did go overboard there. So I don't disagree with the types of carbs he's eating. I disagree with the amounts that he's eating. So I understand that he gets a lot of flack because he did write a book, and you know he kind of helped put the carnivore diet mainstream ish in today's society. So I understand that, but I kind of agree that I'm doing my own 30-day experiment. I've reintroduced a couple more carbs, and in my own anecdotal. And I think this is where women and men kind of differ. And that's kind of what I'm really, really digging into, is some people can benefit from including more carb and can feel better, get better sleep and all that stuff, can help with weight loss also. I think there is some benefit there. I just don't think there's very much benefit going 300 grams. And to the extent Paul went, I still think you should maintain low carb, which is 150, 100 or less. I'm definitely way less than that, but I think he went overboard, but I don't disagree with the types of carbs he's eating per se, if that makes sense.
Sure, that makes sense, yeah. So we're both in agreement, 300 grams of carbs a day is a load of crap, at least from our experience and our professionalism. Now, what kind of carbs do you think are more helpful? Or do you think there's a toxicity between them? Like, say you're going to add 50, 100 grams of carbs in a day, what would you choose?
So sticking with Paul, from what I understand, I don't think he's done a lot of what I eat in a day videos, at least that I've seen. I don't really follow him that closely, but from what I understand, he eats a lot of fruit, like pineapple, bananas that he picks fresh from the tree and whatever in Costa Rica, seasonal. So he eats in season, which I agree with, and honey, which I don't have. I don't eat honey, but I don't disagree with that. So I don't think the carbs he's eating are necessarily inherently bad. The quantity that he's eating is bad, right? Because then you have all that fructose, and that's a whole different conversation with toxicity and all that stuff. But for me, I primarily eat avocado. And I know people who have seen my videos kind of know that avocado, berries, more recently cashews, every once in a while are kind of like the staple. I have tried oatmeal like months ago, like Quaker oats, and that really messed up my stomach because of the glyphosate and all that. So I did find glyphosate-free oatmeal, and I just tried it to see how that affects my stomach, and it doesn't bother me one bit. So that really doesn't affect me. But the brand I have is only 14 grams of carbs, whereas the Quaker Oat brand and all the other brands are like 24 or more grams. So it's definitely lower in the carbs. So for me, that's kind of like the minimal I reintroduced. I did try pineapple, which is a staple in his diet, and that didn't sit well in my digestive system. So I think with me, I stick with the berries, because when it comes to fruit, that's less than sugar, less than fructose, that's lesser of the evils. So I still have my premise to where I'm less than 50 grams and I'm still mindful of the sugars and all that stuff. So I think as long as it doesn't affect you and you feel better on it, I personally don't see a problem with it. Where I see the problem is the high starchy foods, the high sugary foods, and eating those in abundance. That's where I draw the line, because that's where I think that turns into a slippery slope.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, you touched on the point of fructose, and how that goes down the same metabolic pathway as alcohol. The way it causes insulin resistance, not ideal. Again, it's like a dose-dependent response, I'm guessing. And some people are going to be more, what should I say, tolerant to certain things within plant foods than others. Like, I don't deal well with things like garlic, onions, salicylates, fiber, fructose. So I'm pretty much doomed with most of these things. Oxalates. About the pineapple, yeah, pineapple's very high in oxalates, believe it or not. So yeah, I kind of see a point. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a toxicity level, and I think 300 grams of carbs per day is a lot. And it just kind of goes back on himself in that he said in his book, you sort of eat protein to sort of do your stuff and build muscle, produce enzymes, things like that. Then you eat fat to give your body the energy that it needs. Now he's just activating the Randall cycle. He's having both.
Yeah, but what do you think about his activity level? So if you think, and this is where I kind of defend Paul a little bit. Like I said, he did go overboard. I'm not defending that aspect, but the quantity. But he's in Costa Rica. He's out in the sun. He surfs upwards of 4 hours a day in the sun. And outside of surfing in the same day, he exercises, whether it's lifting weights, skateboarding. So he's outside 6 hours or more a day, sweating his butt off, burning through electrolytes, all that stuff. So that's where there's a point where he can likely get away more so with the types of foods he's eating because of his lifestyle. I'm not saying all that fructose is still healthy and blah, 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 blah. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is because of his lifestyle, like me, if I did what he did, I'd balloon. I'd be fat as heck. But he can, I'm not saying his insides are going to be optimal in a long run, but because of his lifestyle, what do you think of his lifestyle and him reincorporating things like the bananas and pineapple in season and the honey based off of Paul's lifestyle, not our lifestyle? What are your opinions on that?
I think there's definitely an aspect of seasonality to the foods that you eat. And the reason why that is significant is because they would grow in nature. But my objection to this would be, where did these pineapples come from throughout history? Were they modified? Were they bred in such a way to have a higher sugar content? That's probably true in this sort of case. I mean, I've looked at a video recently where someone's saying, oh, this is what a banana looks like in the wild. And it's this tiny little nail-long thing, and it's got loads of seeds in it, and you can't really eat it because it's full of crunchy nuts and seeds or things in it. So I'm thinking that's not really, a natural food. Now, when it comes to the exercise, being in the sun, being in the sun will help him deplete more deuterium. He'll create more metabolic water. Will that be a more difficult process if he's carb fueled? And if he's eating 300 grams of carbs per day, chances are he's carb fueled rather than fat fueled. In terms of the predominance of his metabolic pathways and enzymatic processes. So for me, I think, it's more doable in his situation, yes, by all means. But I think there could be compounding issues which arrive later down the line when he is no longer this active. Then he's got to change his diet overall. So he has a lifestyle which matches his diet in terms of he can kind of deal with it. But when he eventually stops and he changes his lifestyle, he'll have to change his diet as well. So he might be on 50 grams of carbs a day. I'm thinking, that's quite a big drop. He then has to change his metabolic system to deal with that. He has to transition back to a more fat-based diet as he ages, perhaps. But I know people have made different speculations about how he's aged over the last few years. I think maybe he looks a bit older. I mean, I'm not going to bully the guy. I don't know him. I've not really looked at close detail, but a lot of people have said that he's much more aged as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago, which could be true.
I mean, is that diet related, or is that the dude spends 6 hours in the sun every single day? I mean, that plays a role on your skin and all that too. So I think that's like a dogmatic, not saying you, just the people who are commenting on his looks, is a very dogmatic statement, because you have to take his entire lifestyle into account. You can't just say, oh, he's eating carbs, he looks old. Like, that doesn't make sense when you take into account his entire lifestyle. I mean, he's getting blasted by the sun. He's in salt water every day, all day. So, I mean, it's not just diet.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from completely. Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with being in a latitude which is inappropriate for his genetic origins. For example, if I went to Ecuador or Nairobi, well, yeah, of course, I'm going to be, aging much faster. My skin's not going to be able to deal with that damage. Then again, you have to have some sunlight exposure. I think he's probably overdoing it. Yeah. I know he's against things like seed oil, so that's going to be playing in his favor. He's not going to burn as easy as other people. But I think if he scaled it back a bit, like you said, like with the carbs, maybe lesser amount of carbs, and just maybe not being in the sun 6 hours a day, by the sounds of it, it'd probably be quite helpful. Should we continue, or do you have anything to add? Cool.
Nope.
Into jiu-jitsu because I had eczema on my knees and it was getting infected. So getting rid of vegetables really helped with my eczema. But then I learned after a year and a half that I was getting such bad muscle cramps, heart palpitations, sleep disturbances. My testosterone was kind of going down. Right now it's around 700 or 800. I've included carbohydrates in my diet for the last 2.5 years. But at that point it was going 450, 500, it was significantly lower. And my sex hormone binding globulin was creeping up. So I had electrolyte issues. And what I realized was that I'd been thinking about insulin wrong. I'd been thinking that I needed to keep my insulin low all of the time. And to be fair, on a carnivore diet, my fasting insulin was low, 3.5, 3.0. And I thought incorrectly that if I ate carbohydrates, my insulin would spike and that would be a bad thing, right?
After today's video, I want you to check out Bub's.
What do you think about that before we skip this?
That was trippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing research on in my experiment. So I'm not going to talk about that a lot here, but what I've read and the videos I've seen. So I'm bordering the perimenopause age and all that stuff. So my hormones are starting to shift, and I think that's why I started sleeping like crap and just low energy. Like, I think I had other things in play, and for me, going as low as I went, I was damn near close to zero. It just didn't set well with me, because what I've read and some of the videos I've seen by Dr. Mindy Pelton and other people, that carbs do help with your sex hormones. Glucose does help with your sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and stuff like that, from what I've read. Now, this isn't my expertise. I'm not super smart on that. I'm just starting to, learn more about those things. So when it comes to that stuff, I can see where he's coming from, because I'm messing with that as well. And I am noticing so far, I'm like 2 weeks in almost, a positive difference, because when you are having sex hormone issues, it is worth looking at the carbs. Now, of course, types of carbs matter, but from what I read, carbs do help with estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, of course, your serotonin, your neurotransmitters, all that stuff. So I can see where he's coming from when it comes to the carbs and his testosterone level specifically.
Do you think he would experience the same benefit from, as he would have adding carbs to his diet, or specifically glucose or fructose, by just increasing his protein intake, or at least maybe having enough fat with his protein to make sure the insulin level is appropriate?
I mean, it depends. I think he was eating predominantly animal food, so I think the gluconeogenic effect would have been there. I think if you are struggling energy-wise and all that stuff, there's truly, in my opinion, no harm in adding carbs just to give you that extra boost, because I think that's where the individuality comes in. Not only tolerance, but the quantity, right? The quantity that your body needs to function optimally. So maybe in his case, similarly in my case, it seems, like I said, I'm only 2 weeks into this experiment, but some people may see more of a benefit just adding minimal carbs back in to help with those things. Now, of course, we can get into the fructose and all that stuff, the types of carbs he adds in. Do I necessarily agree with that? Not necessarily. But I can see where he's coming from with the carbs when it comes specifically to sex hormones.
I see, yeah. I think it's always difficult to match the blood markers with symptomology. I know he's talking about things here like heart palpitations. And part of me is thinking, okay, he wants to increase testosterone, the SHBG, all this sort of stuff. But if the main issue is the palpitations, wouldn't it be of benefit to just have a blood test where he measures his, serum calcium, serum sodium, potassium, magnesium, then identify a deficiency, use a supplement of some kind or a food that's high in that particular mineral to alleviate that deficiency, then he can work out from there, oh, okay, this is the issue. So it kind of makes you think, is it actually a insulin issue or is it a deficiency in a mineral? Now it's a lot to sort of play around with because we're dealing with multiple different facets here. There's going to be the blood marker side of things, the symptomology, how it presents itself. Then you're dealing with how meticulous is he with his diet. Was he having too much protein, too lean protein? Are there too many organs in there? I mean, we know that if we have too much of specific vitamins or minerals, that can actually throw off the balance in some cases. And yeah, I do say balance because some of them do compete for the same receptor, and some actually inhibit their absorption, whereas some actually can increase absorption. For example, vitamin C and iron, they kind of work synergistically. Do you think much about that at all, or is it mostly due to just needing a bit more glucose maybe?
I mean, it depends. Like I said, what I've read that glucose. So of course we know fat balances hormones, but when it comes specifically to sex hormones, that's where glucose comes into play. Like I said, just based off what I've read, this isn't my area of expertise. Just based off what I read, that specifically is what helps the sex hormones. Now, when it comes to heart palpitations, yeah, I agree. It could be electrolyte imbalance. It could be a number of things, but I think carbs is a sticky area. So in my previous life, I used to say carbs have a bad reputation, all that stuff, and blah blah, spew that stuff. But I think carbs have been demonized, I think, a bit too much. I think we went too far on the other end. I truly don't see a harm in consuming carbs, because we'd be ignorant to say that we get zero nutrition from carbs. We do. Like if I eat blueberries, you'd be ignorant to say there's zero benefit to that. Is it as beneficial as eating meat? No. Do you absorb as much? No. Of course, there's a bioavailability component, but you are absorbing nutrients from those foods to some extent. So I think there are benefits in that most people, because not everyone can go zero, right? I couldn't stay zero. There are benefits for people, in my opinion, to consume carbs, because there are nutrients you are getting from them. Bioavailability aside, you are getting things from those foods. So I don't see the harm in, if you are feeling like garbage, just try things out and see what works and just see how you feel. I don't think blood markers tell the whole story or are the end all be all, because your markers can be optimal, but you can still feel like crap. So I don't know. It's kind of like a mixed bag for me. It's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I can see your point of view completely. There's always an area of subjectivity with this sort of thing. We don't know exactly what's going on in the body at every given time. For myself, I tried the Lion diet and I had heart palpitations. For me, I think it was an issue with a lack of calcium because I wasn't consuming any dairy. I lasted 3 days and I felt horrendous, like really bad, anxious. Imagine my cortisol was very high and it wasn't a nice feeling. Now, I did start this from a carnivore, animal-based sort of diet, but saying that, I shouldn't have had such drastic issues, because I know lots of people that have had, I went Lion diet. On day one, I felt much better. I didn't have that experience. It kind of tells me maybe our epigenetics are a bit different. Maybe some people need a bit more of this, a bit more of that. And yeah, maybe there are some fruits and maybe even vegetables sometimes which have some beneficial nutrients, which may also be in animal foods. but they have an additional benefit, like a compounding effect. But of course, there are some things, like spinach, kale, almonds, which have a net negative where the oxalates will chelate the minerals, the calcium, and prevent absorption. So I guess if you're selective about the ones that you choose and you're feeling like death, and you've been through all the other rabbit holes to try and fix your symptomology, then there's something you can try, I guess. Yeah. So something like what you're doing, Nicole, is probably quite sensible.
Yeah. And I think that's where we're in agreement. It's just, it's just not, 100% demonizing things, because everyone is different. And I think we agree the amount he's eating is no bueno, but I think we kind of agree a little bit on the premise. We just might disagree a little bit on the kind of like the in-betweens.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a purist. I think that's just my mindset. I don't think it's I think it's more my unique individuality rather than the actual whole truth. Maybe, I don't know, but we'll carry on, see what they've got to say. Hopefully there's no more ads.
And I wasn't taught this in medical school, was that insulin spikes after you eat carbohydrates are actually healthy for the human body for a variety of reasons. So insulin is probably something else I've changed my mind on, carbohydrates and insulin. What I realize now is that your body needs an insulin signal after a meal when you eat carbohydrates to signal to the kidneys to resorb and hold on to minerals, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So the massive, profound electrolyte problems that people get on long-term ketogenic diets are almost certainly due to a lack of insulin signaling at the level of the kidney. There are various levels of kidney physiology upon which insulin is going to act, but people in the ketogenic space, I think, are well-intentioned that they're trying to hold on to minerals by including massive amounts of salt in their diet, but it just doesn't work, because you need an insulin signal at the level of the kidney to hold on to those things. So the first thing I did when I sort of transitioned off a ketogenic, zero carb, quote unquote, carnivore diet was include honey in my diet. And the first couple of days I felt a little weird because I was physiologically insulin resistant. And then your body kind of adjusts to this, my blood sugar spikes normalize. And if I eat honey today or a few years ago after I had adjusted to having the carbohydrates back in my diet, my blood sugar might go to 130, 140, 150 milligrams per deciliter. But I don't worry about that, because if you look at the actual...
What do you think about that, Nicole?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you think about his statements on insulin? So insulin is super complicated in my opinion, but what do you think about his statements when it comes to insulin specifically? Because you have a biochemistry background, right?
Yeah, I think he's accurate. Talking about the kidneys and how you need an insulin spike. And yeah, you do need that. I mean, how do we know that? People that have electrolyte issues on a ketogenic diet that have 4, 5, 6 meals a day, they never get that threshold. So there's what you call an insulin-glucagon ratio. And if you don't put that insulin level too high through the diet, so whether that be protein and carbs, or even fat will actually do it, but obviously to a very, very low marginal degree, then yes, you won't be able to shuttle electrolytes around your body and you have the symptoms of electrolyte deficiency. It might actually be present in your blood, but in terms of the tissues where the absorption happens, it might not be actually true. So I'm thinking, yes, he probably needs to increase insulin if that was a problem. Whether I would speculate it's more about the action of insulin rather than the necessity to raise insulin. So is the insulin doing the job within the cell? Is that cell being blockaded by other things? Is there a Randall cycle-activation? Is there cross-inhibition happening which prevents the insulin from working within the actual cells of the body, which prevent it from doing the necessary tasks with electrolytes to store them and help enzymes function, things like that? So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. And this is where I defend Paul, because a lot of people just don't believe anything he says just because he's added carbs, but he is a super smart man, and he is well read, and he is very educated. But yeah, when it comes to insulin, yeah, I agree. I just wanted your take, but I agree with him when it comes to insulin, and I agree that when I started adding carbs back in, yeah, I don't know. I've never had my levels tested, but I did feel a certain way, and it did take a while to adjust. So I definitely agree with with your take and Paul's take. I was just curious if you kind of disagreed in any way, but it sounds like the three of us kind of are on the same page.
Yeah, perfect.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.